Today's deep dive is into the article Fauci Rats on Himself by Paul Craig Roberts.
Right.
And before we even get into the weeds on this one,
Mm-hmm.
I need to set the stage for you, the listener,
Mm-hmm.
because we are looking at some incredibly intense material today.
Yeah, intense is putting it mildly.
Exactly. I mean, the author is essentially trying to sell this reality where the tools that were deployed to save humanity, the masks, the vaccines, the hospitals, were actually the mechanical parts of a globally coordinated extermination plot.
Right, which is just a staggering claim. And so we really have to establish the ground rules for today's session right here at the top.
Yeah, go ahead.
This material contains highly controversial, politically charged, and, extremely provocative claims regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is absolutely crucial to state that we are not endorsing, we are not validating, and we aren't taking sides on any of the viewpoints presented in this article.
Right. Not at all.
The sole purpose of this conversation is just to unpack the architecture of the author's argument. We are functioning purely as analysts today.
Just looking at the blueprints.
Exactly. We're looking at the structural engineering of his narrative to report to you exactly what is contained in the source text. No judgment on the ethics or the politics of it.
So keeping that in mind, let's look at the sheer scale of what Roberts is claiming here. He isn't merely critiquing, public health policy, right?
Oh, no.
Or pointing out some bureaucratic inefficiency. He is constructing this massive accusation that specific individuals and entire global institutions orchestrated the intentional assassination of the human race.
Yeah, assassination of the human race is the exact framework he uses.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And he begins this monumental accusation in a really specific, almost counterintuitive place, which is this collection of documents he refers to as the Fauci diaries.
Right, the diaries.
Yeah, he claims Anthony Fauci has an ego so boundless that he essentially documented his own alleged crimes in writing. It kind of makes me think of a classic movie villain.
Oh, totally.
Like the bank robber who pulls off the perfect heist, right? Untraceable. But then he literally mails a notarized diagram of his plan to the police simply because he can't bear the thought of someone else getting the credit for his genius.
That's a really good analogy.
But, from an analytical standpoint, how does the author use this concept of egotism as the foundational proof for the rest of his argument? Why start there?
Well, starting with the premise of a self-authored confession is a very deliberate structural choice. Because, in any narrative that proposes a conspiracy of this scale, the hardest hurdle for an author is proving intent.
Right, finding the motive.
Exactly. By pointing to these alleged diaries, Roberts is trying to bypass the need to piece together circumstantial evidence. He's telling his reader, you don't have to guess at the motive because the architect of the crime literally wrote it down himself, blinded by his own hubris.
So it's basically a shortcut to proving guilt.
Yes. And he uses this alleged self-incrimination as a lever to manufacture this really profound sense of urgency. I mean, if you accept the premise that the main architect of a global crime has already confessed in writing, then the natural follow-up question is, well, why is this person walking free?
Right. Why hasn't anyone done anything?
Precisely. Roberts uses that disbelief, the idea that Fauci has escaped indictment or imprisonment or even execution despite this supposed paper trail, to argue that the justice system itself is fundamentally broken.
Or that it's complicit.
Yes, complicit. The diaries serve as the inciting incident for the broader thesis, because if the evidence is just sitting in plain sight and no one in power is acting on it, well, then the corruption has to extend far beyond just one individual.
And if you're a reader buying into that premise, you were forced to look at the rest of the system.
Right.
And Roberts really casts a wide net here. He places the blame on the pharmaceutical industry, the medical profession at large, what he calls bought and paid for medical boards.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back.
He doesn't. He explicitly labels the press as the whore media. But, if we look at the mechanics of this argument, this is where the whole thing hits a massive wall for me.
The logistics of it.
Yeah, exactly. If we are talking about coordinating an effort across competing global industries, thousands of rival media outlets, millions of independent doctors, and doing it all without a single credible leak.
It's basically impossible.
It's like trying to get 10,000 musicians to play a symphony in perfect harmony, except none of them are allowed to see the sheet music and half of them speak different languages. How does he even explain such an airtight coordination without it just all falling apart?
Well, you've hit on the Achilles heel of any grand systemic theory, right? The logistical impossibility of keeping a secret among millions of people. But Roberts circumvents this by introducing a unifying, self-organizing mechanism.
Which is what?
Fear. Yeah, he doesn't actually need to argue that every doctor in a rural clinic or every journalist at a local paper was invited to some secret cabal meeting. Instead, he posits that the fear generated by the pandemic acts as this invisible conductor for your orchestra.
Okay, so the musicians don't need sheet music if they are all just playing the same note out of sheer panic.
That is precisely the mechanic he is describing. In his framework, fear bypasses the rational, consensus-building processes of society. And crucially, this ties into how Roberts views the American public.
Right. He has some strong opinions on the public.
Very strong. He describes the masses quite bluntly as lacking the intelligence and the knowledge to realize they're being driven to an unknown destination.
Wow. So he's just directly insulting the general population.
He is, but by insulting the general public, he's simultaneously flattering the reader. He creates this exclusive in-group.
Oh, I see. Like, if you're smart enough to read this article.
Exactly. The implication is that if you are reading his article and understanding his theory, well, you are immune to the fear that has blinded everyone else.
That's a very effective rhetorical trick.
It is. Meanwhile, the institutions that should be providing oversight, like the media and the medical boards, he claims they are neutralized by financial dependency. So fear drives the public and money silences the watchdogs.
Okay, that makes sense of how he rationalizes the machine operating. So let's look at the actual machinery of the attack as he lays it out. The primary weapon in this alleged assassination attempt is, of course, the virus itself.
Right.
And he provides a very specific timeline. He claims the virus was undeniably man-made and that the research to make it, easily spreadable was directly funded by Fauci.
Yes, he traces that funding line.
Yeah, from a university in North Carolina, moving eventually to Wuhan, China, basically framing it as laundering a covert operation overseas.
Well, he's weaving together actual elements of public discourse here, gain-of-function research, the relocation of scientific studies, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but he's rearranging them into a deliberate blueprint for a biological attack.
But then, right after he establishes this timeline, Roberts does this logical pivot that I find really fascinating, because it completely upends the usual trajectory of these theories.
The failure of the virus.
Yes. Okay, let's unpack this. He claims that the virus was meant to be a deadly human extermination tool, but it actually failed to be deadly enough.
Right.
And usually, these theories claim the virus was an unstoppable, perfect killer. Why make that argument? What does arguing that it was a failed bioweapon setup?
Well, it actually solves a fundamental mathematical problem in his narrative.
How so?
If you are arguing that the intent of this global cabal is the complete assassination of the human race, the actual death toll of COVID-19 simply doesn't align with that goal.
Right, because humanity survived. Society kept going.
Exactly. If the virus was a primary weapon, the conspiracy theory collapses under the weight of empirical reality. Therefore, Roberts structurally has to categorize the virus as a failure.
Oh, wow. So he's trapped by the reality of the survival rate.
Yes. By doing this, he keeps the apocalyptic intent intact, but he explains away why the world didn't actually end, and more importantly, categorizing the virus as a failure acts as the necessary logical bridge to introduce the true threat.
Right, because if the primary weapon fails, the assassins need a backup plan.
A secondary deployment. The failure of the virus is the pretext required to convince the population to accept the actual instruments of their own destruction.
And this brings us to what might be the most aggressive inversion of reality in the entire text. Roberts claims that the backup human extermination tool consisted of the very measures designed to fight the virus.
The interventions.
Yeah, the vaccines, the masks, and the lockdowns. He asserts that the quote-unquote vaccine was created and mandated by corrupt governments and employers. And he specifically calls out the Biden Secretary of Defense.
Right, Lloyd Austin.
Yeah, for enforcing these mandates on the military. Why single out that specific official?
It's a tactical rhetorical choice. It takes this sweeping, almost abstract theory about global extermination, and it anchors it firmly to a recognizable contemporary political figure.
It makes it tangible.
Exactly. It transforms the conspiracy from a vague, shadowy threat into a tangible policy that's being enacted by a specific official in the current administration. That sharply escalates the immediate stakes for his audience.
And he really compounds those stakes, because he argues that the death toll wasn't just naturally occurring. He says it was intentionally inflated by those non-pharmaceutical interventions.
The masks and lockdown.
Yeah, he claims they weren't for safety at all, but were mandated specifically to add to the death toll. He even states that the official Hospital treatments were deadlier than the virus itself,
Right.
and that the only people who escaped unhurt were those who completely avoided the vaccine and stayed far away from hospitals.
In terms of narrative architecture, this is a complete 180-degree reversal of institutional consensus. In his framework, the hospital is no longer a place of healing.
It's an execution chamber.
Yes, exactly. The public health mandate is no longer a shield, it's the sword. By arguing that only the unvaccinated and those who refused medical care survived unscathed, he's creating this really powerful confirmation loop for his readers.
Because they probably resisted those interventions themselves.
Exactly. He is validating their noncompliance as a literal survival tactic.
Which brings up a highly specific detail he uses, and it's kind of wild. He highlights that online dating sites are now featuring advertisements specifically for people who avoided the COVID vaccine.
Oh, the dating pools. Yeah.
Yeah. He uses it to show how deep this cultural divide goes.
That detail about dating sites is honestly one of the most fascinating sociological markers in the entire piece.
Right, because it's so personal.
Think about the implications of that. He is taking a macro-level geopolitical conspiracy theory and demonstrating how it has infiltrated the most intimate micro-level aspects of human interaction.
Romance, partnership, having kids.
Exactly. Reproduction. When vaccination status becomes a strict filter for dating, the ideological divide has mutated into a biological one.
That's a great way to put it.
Roberts is using this to show that the believers of this narrative are basically forming an entirely parallel society, complete with their own closed mating pools.
Which suggests a total breakdown of shared reality.
Yeah, a world where the two sides can no longer even intermingle on a personal level.
Which naturally begs the question, how does this alternate reality justify its own existence when faced with mainstream consensus? Like, how does he support these claims?
He has to rely on a massive cover-up narrative.
Right. And he introduces this pre-release theory. He cites a book by Soren Rost Korsgaard titled The New September 11th.
Yes.
Roberts claims this book provides endless documentation proving the virus was released globally months before it was officially discovered in China.
Right, the pre-release theory.
He insists that any professional looking at this data would immediately see the truth of an intended assassination. But, if this endless documentation really exists, any skeptical reader is going to ask, why isn't this front page news?
Exactly.
Why hasn't Congress subpoenaed everyone involved?
And this is where Roberts deploys the ultimate defense mechanism of the conspiratorial narrative, the systemic cover-up.
Yeah, the cover-up. He points specifically to U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. According to Roberts, Senator Johnson actively tried to expose the truth of this global assassination plot.
But he was blocked.
Right. He says Johnson was systematically shut down by a U.S. Congress, heavily funded by Big Pharma, and a media entirely dependent on pharmaceutical ad revenue.
Yeah.
So the author is framing Senator Johnson as this lone, righteous truth teller going up against an invincible corporate monolith. It's a total David versus Goliath narrative.
It really is.
How does framing the institutions this way serve to inoculate the author's claims against mainstream debunking?
It creates what you could call a perfectly sealed epistemological fortress.
An epistemological fortress. Okay, explain that.
The logic operates like a trap. The
Hmm.
premise is that the institutions responsible for investigating the truth, so Congress, the media, the scientific community, they are all financially compromised by the very people committing the crime. Therefore, when a major newspaper refuses to publish the pre-release theory, or when Congress declines to hold hearings on the Fauci diaries, the author can claim that this silence is not proof that the theory is wrong.
Oh, I see. The silence becomes the proof that the corruption is real.
Exactly. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
A lack of evidence is offered as the strongest evidence of a cover-up.
That is wild.
If an official institution attempts to debunk the author's claims, their debunking can be immediately dismissed because, well, they just belong to the horror media or the bought and paid for regulatory boards.
Right. The narrative is structurally designed to reject any information that doesn't validate its core premise.
Exactly. The mechanism. And utilizing a sitting senator like Ron Johnson is particularly effective here.
Because it gives it a sheen of legitimacy.
Yes. It provides the reader with a glimmer of institutional validation. Like, look, a sitting member of the government agrees with us.
But then he gets shut down.
Right. Which simultaneously proves the hopelessness of relying on the government. Because if even a U.S. senator was silenced by the overarching conspiracy, what hope does anyone else have?
It really paints a picture of a world where the truth is entirely trapped behind enemy lines.
It does.
And Roberts doesn't offer any real sense of salvation at the end of his article either. We arrive at his final warning, And it is a remarkably bleak conclusion.
Very bleak.
He asserts that a second attack is already in the pipeline and is coming soon. He specifically names Bill Gates, alleging that Gates is actively gloating about this impending second pandemic.
Right.
And then he turns directly to his audience and he poses this final, highly provocative question. He literally asks, are the American people too stupid to survive?
Ending on that specific question serves multiple rhetorical functions.
I'm sure it does.
First, it's an aggressive call to action. By framing survival as a matter of intelligence, he is essentially daring the reader.
Daring them to prove they aren't stupid.
Exactly. Daring them to prove it by fully embracing and acting upon his narrative. And second, the mention of an impending second attack ensures that the fear, the mechanism he identified earlier as driving the masses, is maintained.
Because the threat isn't over.
Right. If the first extermination attempt failed and the second is imminent, the reader is left in a state of perpetual high alert.
There's no resolution.
No resolution at all, only the anticipation of the next catastrophe.
Man. You know, regardless of where you stand on any of this or what anyone makes of the specific claims regarding the viruses or the vaccines, this text really forces us to think about the nature of trust in the modern world.
It acts as a stark mirror for the current crisis of institutional trust.
It really does. I mean, when an author argues that every major institution, from the doctors in your local hospital to the anchors on the evening news to the lawmakers in the Capitol, is entirely compromised by a lethal agenda, how does a society even begin to agree on a shared reality?
That's the core issue, isn't it?
Yeah. If a sizable portion of a population adopts the baseline assumption that all institutional information is inherently weaponized against them, and the very concept of verifiable truth is viewed as a trap, where do we possibly find the common ground required to function as a community? It's definitely something to mull over.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to another session of the NotebookLM.News series. You can find the full archive of all my podcasts at NotebookLM.News.